Justice. That's a strong word. It's a great word, isn't it? It's a word that we hear a lot about in our society. You can see it in different places, like the term even social justice. You hear that sometimes in different places, maybe on the news and different things. We have a ministry called the Gospel Justice Center. It starts to evoke some ideas and thoughts in our minds. There's a t-shirt I saw, and here's the t-shirt. It says this: no justice, no peace. You can see that sometimes on signs, people wearing those. Or no justice. If you know justice, you will know peace. And so we see that in our culture. There's a clothing store for kids. I didn't even know this. Susan told me. She said, Justice Just for Girls. There's a store. I've never seen it, never been there, but it used to exist in stores. And then, of course, when I was a kid, this word here, Justice League, right? The superheroes, the DC Comics, and they were heroes who saved the day. And this word is such a great word, and it's in our culture all over, but it's actually a biblical word. It's a great Bible word. Let me just read a couple of references. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18 says this: Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are those who wait for him. Isaiah 61, verse 8 says, For I, the Lord, love justice. Listen to what he hates. He loves justice, but he hates robbery and wrong. I will faithfully give them their recompense, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Micah 6:8, one of the most famous Bible passages in the scripture about justice, it says this: He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Matthew 23, verses 23 to 24 says this: Now Jesus says this: Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy, faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others, you blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Justice. In the Old Testament, this word is mishpat. And mishpat is used 200 times in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament. This idea, the most basic idea of justice, is that people would be treated equitably. Justice is giving people what they are due. It could be punishment or protection, right? God's justice would be that we would spend eternity separated from him because of our sin. That would be just. It would be right. But God's justice also means that people who are vulnerable are protected from those that are oppressing them and holding power over them. To say that God is a God of justice is to say that he is a God who cares about the right and the way that we exercise our power and authority. God is the ultimate power and authority in the universe, and he wants to see a world where people execute justice in a way that is just and right, not taking advantage of people. We've talked about the economic systems. We've talked about the political systems, religious systems, and we see the abuse of power in churches and religions around the world at times where people are doing unjust things, and we get upset about it because it's not right. And when we feel that rising up in us, this idea of injustice, it is because God is a God of justice and he created us with this. And so when we feel this sense of injustice, it's a good thing. Now, there are so many different ways that power is used. And sometimes, again, I said religious, but it could also be in families. It could be used in a very bad way. Maybe some aunts or uncles that have abused others because they had some kind of a power, and in secret they've done some things and it is unjust. We call it injustice when somebody exercises power and authority that violates God's standards for what is right. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, it is all over the scriptures. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verse 1 says this: Again, I saw the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power. I want you to hold on to that because we're going to be talking about that a lot. And there was no one to comfort them. This is week 3 of our Sanctity series. Sanctity, in the image of God. Every person is made in the image of God, whether you like them or not, whether they are a Christian or not, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, or they're from France or England or America or India or Romania. It doesn't matter. If they are alive and have a breath, they are made in the image of God. They may not walk like a child of God or in that image, but we know that they have worth and dignity just by being alive. And we started talking about the sanctity of life in the womb for the unborn child. That child there, unborn, is sacred, as we talked about our definition of sanctity. Then we talked week 2 about the sanctity of life for the poor. And this week we're going to be talking about the sanctity of life for the slave. For the slave, every person created in the world. Now, we've heard from so many of you of how this series has impacted you and how you want to get involved. There may be even some new ministries that have started because of this. And so we're going to give you an opportunity to respond to that at the end of our service. But let's turn our attention to the screen. Every week we've showed you just a little clip of Christians that are doing something. I mean, we're talking about people who love Jesus, who are doing something about these things that are so on the heart of God and should be on our heart as well. So turn your attention to the screen and check out the work of IJM, International Justice Mission.
This is the private establishment. First suspect, you for our victims.
And remember, if there's a hazard or dangerous situation, move yourself to a position of cover.
And we keep on it, you know, to the police.
We saw about 1,200 little kids who've been found out that they were in fact trafficked and they were in fact slaves. These little kids are on this boat. They are not fed. They are abused beyond imagination.
We need to move quickly. We gotta cut you off.
This is the girl. Whenever something like this comes, I imagine in my mind that girl is found.
We have operations all over the world, rescuing people from slavery. Because today there are criminals who abuse children, sell girls,
How old is she? 12.
12? How much?
30? Yeah, I'm afraid.
and force families into slavery. Criminals prey on the easiest target, the world's poor, because they expect no one to defend them.
Pareho po tayong mga tao. Hindi po tayo bagay or hayop na pwedeng gamitin lang sa pansarili.
But today, there are thousands of people gathering to seek justice for those in slavery. We are a group of lawyers, counselors, advocates, and supporters. We are called International Justice Mission. And together we form a global community committed to building a world where all are safe and free. But slavery won't come to an end until criminals know that they can't get away with it. So we partner with local police to arrest and prosecute criminals. This sends a message to the slave owners: we will not go away. We stay with the survivors until they are healed, until they are free.
Natulungan po ako ng IJM sa pamamagitan po na sa case ko, sa pagtulong po nila na ma-overcome ko po yung fear.
Each year we rescue thousands of people and protect millions around the world. We are transforming how justice systems protect their citizens. To those who are still suffering, we promise to find you. We'll work with our partners all over the world to get you home to your families so that you can have the freedom you deserve.
want to welcome Saju Matthew here. He is the regional president of South Asia. That's India and Bangladesh. That's where he's working and leading. And Saju is just one of my closest friends, ministry for a lot of years. And, watching that video all week long, thinking about some of the things that people go through. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to hear some of the things. And you're going to hear some very dark things in just a moment. And I'm just thankful for people like you. So, we've got a relationship that goes back a lot of years. And we knew each other when we were teenagers, not friends by any means, but acquaintances, part of the same church, Mar Thoma Church. Some of you know that church. And we ended up in 1998, 1999, when we moved out to Philadelphia, Susan and I and Saju and Anu, and we had Josiah at the time, and they had Jonah. We bought a house together, and we lived in community in West Philadelphia. Here's a picture of the house we bought. It's like a row home. We're the right side there, and we had this home. And Saju will talk a little bit about some of the things that we did in that house. And here's a picture of what we looked like when we were there. At that time, Caleb is in the middle. He was leading worship over here. And then Nathan, barely able to hold up his head, he was just born in that house. And so that's how they grew up as families. We had a same kitchen, same living rooms. We had our own living spaces and bedrooms for the kids and things. But we just had a great time. I mean, it was incredible. So, what do you remember about those days?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for having me, and good to be with you all today. It's really surreal, honestly, to be here because we were together doing this work in Philadelphia, and for 20 years, God took us along different paths. So to sit here, it just feels like, God is allowing us to have a moment together. So I'm grateful for that. We were just trying to figure out how to live authentic Christian lives. We love Jesus. We had young families, and we were trying to figure out, well, what do we do with that? So we decided, let's move into West Philadelphia. Let's not live in our own place. Let's try community living. And not just that, let's try to figure out how to have our house open so that whatever thing is going on in the neighborhood, maybe we can be added value. And so it was really just an experiment of trusting God, taking a risk with each other, and seeing what happens. And my gosh, it changed my life. It transformed, from just the neighborhood where we just made ourselves available. Every week, I think we had somewhere between 30, 50, 70 people that would come in for meals, and they were just taken care of. It was available.
And the Bible study Friday night?
Yes, we would meet on Friday nights or Bible study, and whether you're a believer or whether you are angry with Jesus, you just come in and spend the evening. Of course, we had young kids, and people wouldn't leave.
That's right.
2, 3 in the morning. There are people still talking and debating and trying to figure out what's going on. And so I know Mohan is a worship guy too, so he's phenomenal. So you should come on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, I've seen that side also. But also, I remember people who had broken their parole violation, and Mohan trying to reconnect them with the system there, and homeless people with drug addictions, and just trying to figure out what it meant to be intentional living for Jesus, and college students in the area that were able to come and experience it. So, yeah, we just took a risk with Jesus and with each other.
Yeah, that's great. Well, tell us a little bit about how you came to faith in Christ.
Yeah, well, I was a stubborn believer, even though I did grow up in a church background. I certainly fell away in my college years and thought that there was no God. All the things that sort of filled my head made me doubt, his presence, his goodness, his love. I went to law school, I was still quite distant, and it was in my mid-20s where I actually met Jesus. It was actually following an event that Mohan was at. And so it was in the Poconos, and young people trying to figure out, I was about 25 years old, trying to figure out, how do we sort of build community and connect with each other? And I went there just to be a skeptic and, be somebody who would challenge things. And I thought, what is these people talking about? So if you have people you love who are skeptics, who are hard-headed, who are resistant, keep pressing away. I was one of those people. But honestly, it was just a drive down from the Pocono Mountain listening to Stephen Curtis Chapman's on, a CD player at the time, or tape deck, I think it was at the time, and the Holy Spirit just met me and showed me He's real and God is real.
Oh, that's
And,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday, the last couple of days they've been staying with us, and we were talking about some of those Bible studies that we were at, and I would go visit Philadelphia, and he'd be there, and I was like, yep, you were in those Bible studies, and he was annoying, and he's very smart, and, again, I was new in my faith too, and wasn't really up for debating, but some were, and so I would just kind of eat popcorn and watch them all, debate, but I'm just very thankful. So how did you were a lawyer, and then you joined the work of IJM, so tell us a little bit about that journey.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think in many ways, Mohan, the step of moving into West Philadelphia together was a huge one, because it was a risk for us, and it was a big step. And I think taking a step allows you to take the next step and the next step. And I consider moving to Chennai, India with our family in around 2008, a step of faith. Someone who we knew, whose sister actually goes to this church. He had been an intern in law school, went and did an internship with IJM, came back, showed me some videos. And honestly, I was like, really? Like, God is using lawyers to do like Christian ministry work? Is that even possible? And it just one thing led to another. And I remember even sitting down with you and Susan and some other friends and discussing like, is this an option? Should we do this? What does it look like? But before you knew it, Anu and me and our 5 kids are in Chennai, India, trying to figure out how to rescue people out of slavery and fix the justice system there. And it's been an adventure.
Yeah, that's great. So how many years has it been for you?
16 years.
16 years, that's incredible. Tell us a little, Well, tell us a little bit about the International Justice Mission, how it started, and the mission.
Yeah. Well, you saw the video, so you get a glimpse of sort of the work. There is an element of danger and challenge because the thing that our founder, his name is Gary Haugen, in the 1990s, he was deputed as part of the United Nations team that went into Rwanda immediately after the genocide. Some of you may remember that. It was just close to 1 million people dead in a matter of just months, and trying to figure out, the international community trying to figure out how to reconcile and make sense of it. And he was there investigating this, and he was wondering at the time, like, where are Christians when it comes to dealing with the problem of violence, right? There's Christians do wonderful work when it comes to education or medicine, right? Or clean water, so many mercy ministry things, but why not in the whole field of violence? What does Christian ministry look like? And there really wasn't much that he could find. So one thing led to another. And so the work of IJM is, how do you rescue people who are currently trapped in some violent situations, but there's no justice system doing the work? So can we come alongside a broken, corrupt, ill-trained, poorly functioning justice system in countries around the world and make sure that these people get rescued out of those situations, and the criminals who are doing this gets prosecuted, and then there's a social service system that knows how to put their arms around them and help them walk back into a sustainable, safe life in freedom. So it was an experiment of just trying to figure it out, but one rescue, 100, 1,000 led to, tens of thousands, to the point where now we're in about 22 to 25 countries around the world doing this work. And over time, we also learned that, what would it look like to repair the system such that IJM isn't even needed there anymore, right? The reality is that when there's problems here, we call 911, and we know that something is there available for us. But can you imagine a world where there's nothing available and those people have nothing to turn to? That's the kind of people and reality that we are entering into, and we're trying to figure out how to show up in a meaningful way, but build the capacity, the will, the attitude of the government itself. Because, God is the one who says that I am the one who sets up government. I appoint the leaders, that the king's heart, right, is in my hands like a water course. So we want to figure out how to come alongside and partner with governments to make them be more accountable and more successful. And so that's been our work now for 25 years, plus doing this.
And so help us understand a little bit about what areas people are currently enslaved that you all are working in.
Yeah, so this term slavery, it's someone who's not free because somebody else is exploiting their body, or for their labor, their work. And so the most common one, I'm sure many of you have heard of, is familiar with the sex trafficking, right? It's technically, it's called CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so that is the common thing, and it's really hard casework type because I can't tell you the number of young children who says that we've rescued out of brothels and places like that who say that, somebody came to our village, told us that I can go to the big city for an education or a job here, flash cash, or made these things. I mean, some of the worst thing is that people go through sham marriages and marry somebody's young girl, but they're just a trafficker who's trafficking them out, and then they find themselves in places where they can't get out. But also, we deal with labor trafficking, slavery, where people are trapped in fishing boats, like you saw in Ghana, in rock quarries and rice mills and brick kilns and carpet making factories, all these sort of industries which still thrive and use slave labor. I mean, there's an estimated 40 million people in the world today who are in slavery. That means that we are living today where there's more slaves than ever in the history of the world. Because during the heyday of what we consider the transatlantic slave trade, about 400 years, it's about 18 million people who are transported, from Africa into North and South America as slaves. And so more than double that existed. Of course, part of the reason is the population is high. But this is the problem that we deal with. And some of the most brutal forms of slavery that we find is the use of technology. So online exploitation is just out of control, because what people can do if you're living in America is that you can go on your computer and there's a child there, let's say in the Philippines, who's been trapped in a situation, and they can basically order what should happen to the child and pay for that to happen. And children as young as 2 years old, and the youngest that we've ever rescued is someone who's 6 months old, from that. So you're just seeing some horrible brutality in the world in modern slavery.
That's, sobering. And we talked about the unborn child, and then just to think, a child is born and it's 6 months old, helpless. And to think of the lifelong, repercussions of these things on these children, it's really hard. I just thinking about that, when he told me that, it was just, I couldn't shake it. I couldn't get it out of my head, and
Yeah.
so it's really tragic. Why don't you just share a little bit, we're going to talk a little about hope and all this. it's really dark places you all are working in. But just share a personal experience that you have of seeing the work, actually work,
Sure.
because there's so many stories where it just seems so desperate. But just tell us a little bit.
Yeah. Because like you, I think, slavery seems like a word from the past or far away. So when I was in Chennai, India, and our team there was responsible to figure out how to rescue people out of slavery, we have a team of investigators, and the job of the investigators is to go undercover into some of these work sites. They're very clever and creative in how they manage to do that. I won't give away their secrets, but they make contact with the victims in those places, and they start to build a case, and they're documenting the information to try to figure out what that is. And our goal is to take these documented evidence, which is really excellent quality, at least we try to make it, and then take it to the law enforcement authorities and do the rescue. That's our way of working, right? So we don't have any legal authority to rescue anybody, so we want to make sure that the system does it. But IGM is pushing, trying to make sure that, the corruption and the problems don't make it fall apart. And there's a lot of ups and downs to that. But I asked my investigators, I said, guys, okay, I want to see this for myself. So they took me into the inner rural areas of southern India. And they were already documenting a case of people that were trapped in a rice mill. So about 6 families, I believe it was, and they were going to get some more documentation of it. And so we went undercover, and they had told this person, sneak out at this time, and we'll interview you. And here's a picture that we took on that day, the very first time I met a person in slavery. It's this man named Kutti. And so he had been working in a rice mill, and he told us that that's where he was all his life, because his parents were slaves in a different rice mill. And when he became a teenager, the owner separated the family, and that's something that they do sometimes, and he got sold to another owner. And so now as a teenage boy, he's working in some random place. He doesn't know what it is, but that's life for him. And he, gets married to another young girl there. They live there, work there, back-breaking work, 16, 18 hours a day. By the point I met him, he has 3 children. But this has been his entire reality all his life. He knows nothing else. And the owner controls everything. When he sleeps, when he gets up, what work he does, and he has no freedom to make any decisions or anything on his own. So I remember this because our investigators were in a conversation and they asked Kuti just a very basic question. How old are you? And he really looked sort of awkward in that moment and didn't know exactly what to say. And he said, 12? And so it makes sense, in those things. It's like, oh my gosh, a person who's isolated from the world, not educated, right, powerless, and therefore has no sense of what's going on in the reality that the rest of us live in is an easy target to be exploited. Clearly, he's a man in his 20s or 30s or something like that. But we got to understand, what is going on here. And he talked about the fact that, this was his reality. And we had no idea where this was going to go, right? Is he going to be rescued? Is that possible? Is that not? But that was my very first experience of meeting a man who was in slavery.
It's just interesting when you say about his age. I think this is from as long as I can remember, right? We have birthdays and friends are coming over and you mark it and there's pictures and my mom making a cake. It's a football this year. It's a basketball this year. You're like, I see all those pictures. I can go back. And our kids was the same way. And you can just see this image of what it's like where you have no celebrations.
Yeah.
Where, to say that he's 12 years old, it brings it to light of like our reality versus the reality of so many people in the world. Now, when we think about slavery, again, growing up, I'm like, didn't Lincoln abolish slavery? You just don't think about these things until you know it. And so when I think about slavery, I used to think about slavery in America, chains and the things I've seen. I watched Roots as a documentary when I was growing up. And so you had these images of what slavery was like. So what is it, like chains, walls? Help us to get a picture of why. How do they do this right now? How do they keep them in this place?
Yeah, we don't, rarely if ever do we find things like chains and walls. Because, the most powerful tool where you can hold someone is your power over that other individual. And the fear that you can exert over them that keeps them in a place where they will not respond, they will not do anything. So the owner, Kuti's owner, is a very powerful slave owner. Look at this next photo here. This is their house where they lived. If you can call it a house. Him and his 3 children and his wife lived in this little, tiny 7x7 little, concrete room. And that's all their possessions that they have. So you keep them in a place where they just have nothing. And I've just seen the power differential that the owners have where they're wealthy, they have their own businesses, they have connections. And even like Kuti talks about stories where, the police would come into the rice mill and sit down and have conversations and chat with the owner. And they always felt like the police was on the owner's side, right? They always felt like they were alone. And so there's this real weaponizing fear is probably the best way I can explain it. That's probably the primary tool where you don't even need walls and chains.
We'll unpack that for a little bit of how somebody would use fear to keep a person trapped in slavery.
Yeah. It's this whole, I can say it this way, I guess. When you're afraid, the reality is nothing else matters. It's a hard thing for us to understand because it's very rare that we've been that afraid that nothing else matters, right? But maybe the best illustration I can maybe help you to do is when you're on an airplane, for example. I don't know if you've ever been on a plane when there's some bad turbulence, right? A lot of people who are expert flyers not really think about it, but I have been where it feels like, okay, that plane just dropped significantly. And that's a lot of shaking, and it's not stopping. And even more seasoned people get a little bit nervous, right? And I've done this. I know other people do. Is you look at each other to sort of think, what's the normal level of panic here?
Yeah.
Like, what should I do?
Is it okay for me to scream?
Is it okay for me to scream?
Yeah.
Are they feeling safe? I don't know. But the one thing I know in that moment is, and I'm praying most of the time when that happens, is, Lord, please, get us, just land us safely. But you know what I don't care about? I don't care what the movie selection is at that moment on the plane. Right? I don't care how long I've been waiting, for my food to arrive. Like nothing.
Right.
Nothing else matters in that moment, when you're afraid. And the Bible tells examples of that. I think in the book of Judges. If you can picture, Israel is a group of just slaves who've been set free into the promised land, but they're very vulnerable. Because they have no organized army, they have no organized nation of any kind. There's actually a verse, if I can read it to you, where it talks about, what would happen to them at the time of harvest. It says, for whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them, and they would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with livestock in their tents. They would be like locusts in number, is how it's described. Both they and their camels could not be counted. And they laid waste the land they came in, and Israel was brought low, and they cried out to the Lord. And it's this picture of this massive power coming in against the vulnerable and taking whatever you want to because you can. Why do these crimes happen in many ways? Because you can get away with it, right? And so you see the power of fear. And actually that story is quite interesting because it's a story that leads up to Gideon's story, right? And Gideon is quite afraid in that story because at one point he's actually threshing wheat in the wine press, right? And I don't know anything about sort of the world of agriculture and farming, but I know that you're not supposed to thresh wheat in a wine press unless you're scared of the Midianites,
Right.
and you're hiding and you're trying to protect the very little that you have.
Wow. Well, it can feel very overwhelming, I would say, to deal with all these things. And just even given the fact that you said you basically abandoned the faith, probably just even say you were an atheist, maybe, agnostic, maybe atheist,
Yeah.
I don't know. You probably wouldn't go there, but like agnostic. And sometimes people will say, well, how could there be God if there's suffering or there's, the poor? And so how do you deal with it? And how does your organization deal with this in the face of just overwhelming stats and discouragement and things? How do you keep going? Like, where's the hope for you and for your teams?
Yeah. I mean, some of the things that really help us is we have some very regular spiritual rhythms. Every day from 8:30 to 9 is a time of stillness around the world, wherever we work, that's our time. Every day at 11, we stop for prayer. So the presence of God matters. I have a colleague who was a human rights worker for almost 30 years in Washington, D.C. with different organizations, and she came to faith, later in her life. And then she joined IJM and became a part of our work. And one thing she says is, Saju, human rights workers are some of the most miserable people I've ever met who don't know Jesus. Because it's so hard to enter into broken, painful, horrible things and make sacrifices, and then to find a way to capacity to hold that if God is not in your story, right? If there's no Jesus in your story. So honestly, for us, it's this sense of, trying to figure out how we can see God in this. And we do see it, Moen. I mean, like in Kuti's case, we eventually got him rescued. And the critical thing when you rescue an individual, because we're trying to follow the legal process, is that he has to be able to tell his story so that a government official can document that it's a crime and something has to be done. But a slave isn't going to speak up when someone comes, an official, and asks a question of some kind. So our investigators, part of their job is to build victim confidence, right? To get them to become someone who tells their story, who will stand up. And actually, I remember the day of the rescue operation, and Kuti had said, okay, I'll do it. And I remember him packing his little stuff and, about to leave, and we're trying to get in it, and we try to do it in 20 minutes before a mob comes and, it gets dangerous. And I could see from the look in his eyes, he was almost saying, sir, yes, I will have confidence. I will say it. And so this next photo here is actually the day that he was rescued, and he's in a government office, and they're handing in an official document called a release certificate saying that the owner has no ability to come back after him. Yeah. He's free. So, it's this inner transformation that really, I think, gives me the greatest joy. I would say our aftercare work, makes me so delighted to see a person look and behave very differently. But I'm also aware of how you walk, how you journey with a person who's in that state, because it takes a long time, for them to be able to speak up and tell their story. And in some ways, that's why I love the Gideon story.
Yeah.
Right? Because you remember the name that the angel called him when
Yeah,
he
the
came?
mighty warrior.
Yeah, mighty warrior, right? And then we were joking around earlier about that because he was not a mighty warrior. He was the most scared man in Israel because when the angel came, he was like, no, you have the wrong person, not me. I'm the smallest of the clan. I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy. And then the angel actually out of hospitality, which is so, common in that culture, Gideon says, let me prepare a meal for you. So he prepares, I think, sheep and a cake and all that kind of stuff. But, unlike today, there's not anything in a refrigerator for him to go and just heat up or freshen up. The beginning is it was a goat actually, it was a live goat is where he's starting from.
Right.
It takes a long time to get to meal stage. But the angel, it says set by a terebinth tree or something like that. And I just got to think, if I were Gideon, I'm wondering, a couple hours is plenty of time for the angel to figure out.
Right, yeah.
You got the wrong guy.
Yeah, he's going to get bored, want to eat somewhere else.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm picturing Gideon like cooking and peeking out saying, oh, he's still here. Oh, he hasn't left yet. So the patience that God has is one of the things that we believe you work patiently in this situation. And I love a later point in the story, the fleece part, right? Everybody remembers Gideon with the fleece part of the story, because again, it's like much later in that stage, and he has a moment of doubt. And these folks have so much doubt,
Right.
the slaves that we deal with, because what we've seen is that you become a shell when you're a slave so that you can manage the pain and hold this, and that's sort of what it is. So if you remember that story, Gideon says, Lord, if you will, can you just tomorrow morning make the fleece dry and the ground wet so that as a sign for me that I know you're with me? And sure enough, God answers it and it happens like that, right? What I love is the very next sentence in that story, because Gideon has this doubt. And I know it because I think I would be the same way. It's like, oh shoot, what if I just put the fleece in a certain spot that's naturally dry? He says, God, next day, can you do this? Can you make the fleece wet and the rest of the land dry, right? And you would think maybe God would sort of get frustrated or give up or get angry and say, okay, I've had enough. I'm going to go get the next guy. But God stoops down to meet a man who is struggling in his faith where he's at, to journey with him through that process. And a lot of what gives us hope is when you journey with people like this, they become, quite different and quite bold and quite courageous.
Yeah, when we were talking, you said that you described yourselves as a group of Christians, right? Like, talk a little bit about that. You're, the group, because I've met several of the leaders, because at his house, I'll meet some of the other leaders there, and, I just know there's like deep faith in Christ. So just tell a little bit about that. What you said.
So, we can define ourselves as justice workers, but we don't. We define ourselves as a community of spiritual formation doing the work of justice. Right? First thing is you're transforming your own faith, your own relationship with Jesus. And as it happens, the outpouring, at least for us, one manifestation of it is that justice is happening. And God is using us, to do his work of justice.
Right. Like, you think about it even in your own lives. This is what we'd hope everybody here would experience. If you follow Jesus, you are reading the word, you're convicted about something, and for you it's just like, man, I need to pray for my neighbor, or I need to do some service over here. I need to share the gospel with this person. And one of the manifestations that has been lacking is, and not through history, you think about William Wilberforce and even Lincoln and others, like you see that the manifestation of it then is like, well, this shouldn't exist, and I'm going to use so I think that's just a beautiful way to look at it. It's like Christians who are concerned about their relationship with the Lord, and then this is an outflow. We're going to do this.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was just so great to hear. Just helped me a little bit to understand you guys a little bit more. So where is IGM's work heading? Like, what does the future look like? The plans and hopes that you have?
Yeah, I mean, we're now, I feel like we've learned a lot doing it, And in some ways, maybe I can describe it like this. Imagine a pipe that has holes in it, right? How do you know, and no water's coming out on the other end, how do you know how to fix it? Well, you attach it to a pipe and then turn it on. And you see everywhere that the water leaks out, right? And so our work forever has been trying to be like plugging up hole after hole after hole of the justice system so that justice can come out. But after we've learned this, now we've really in the place of repairing justice systems while rescuing people, but equipping and strengthening the government and the system. So just this place that I talked to you about, Tamil Nadu, which is the name of the state, the capital city is called Chennai. We worked there, and so about 8 years ago, we started a project to try to expand and have the government really radically transform the state when it comes to slavery. It had a high prevalence of slavery. They estimated that 1 out of every 3 workers in manual labor industries were slaves, about 36%. slavery in that place. So huge number. And so we finished our project. We had an external organization come in and do a measurement and see what it looks like. And the result today is that there's over 380,000 people who are free today from slavery in that state in just that course of that 8 years worth of work.
That's awesome. And then what is your goal like for the future? Where's this heading? And, you gave me some numbers on how many people you want to save from violence. It's just incredible.
Well, it's given us hope, and it does sound audacious, in some ways as we think about it or say it. But, you saw it in the video, ending slavery is the mission of IJM. We want to figure out how we can end it, and it is possible, I think, when Christians come together and commit to doing something like that. So we've seen this one state in India become different, and so we're actually spreading. So one of my own responsibilities is figuring out how to end slavery across a country like that, which is one of the largest prevalent places of slavery. Globally, by the year 2030, we're trying to protect about 500 million people, 500 million people from the problem of violence and bring them to a place of safety and freedom. So we have some big goals here. And I use the Gideon story maybe just as a point of reference again, because you see Gideon entering into this battle against the Midianites. I did some reading and I realized that there were over 100,000 soldiers from the Midianites. That was how big the army was. And if you remember Gideon, he started out with like 30, then it went down to 22 and 10,000. By the end, he only had 300 people. It seems almost like a slaughter, incredibly ridiculous, but the result was God gave Gideon victory over something massive like this. Size was not a problem. In fact, there's a verse in there where it says, I wondered, why are you reducing the soldiers, God?
Right.
It's like, he said, so that Israel will know that it was by my hand that you have been saved. So we feel small, and that can be a little hard to be small. Even in the places that you're at, maybe you feel small in the things that you're taking up. But I think, in it, then we will know at the end, it certainly wasn't our smarts. It certainly wasn't anything on our end, but it was God's faithfulness in doing it. So why not? Why not let this be the generation that says slavery will end in country after country after country, and it'll be in the dustbin of history.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, it'd be incredible. What can Cityline do to partner with IJM?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me and being a part of this, and just making awareness is a big deal. Prayer, I have to tell you, we know God answers prayers. I can't tell you the number of times that we prayed about something. I remember one time an office director came from a place, and we were having this prayer gathering, and he had this thing he was supposed to share, and he just broke down. He said, I got to tell you, we've never gotten a conviction in a single case in all these years. And that Monday, that was on a Saturday, that Monday he gets a call saying, hey, the judge just handed down the first conviction in that city, in that case. So, God will answer prayer. And I ask you to be prayer warriors for us in this work. We would certainly love your support financially if that's something that God is calling you to. We have a table right back there in this room itself. I have my colleague Katie back there. And so we have something called being a freedom partner. It's just a way to sign up and become a partner with the work and really get close and understand about it. We have jobs. So if this is something that might match your career opportunity, we have virtual work, so you're not even asking you to necessarily leave the Chicagoland area. We have internships and fellowships for people who are students to do that. We have a prayer gathering coming up in the Chicago area that you can be a part of. Yeah. So that's something. I will say.
What's the date of that again?
Oh, I don't have the date.
March 23rd?
Yes, March 23rd.
Okay.
March 23rd. It's right nearby here. I think less than 20 minutes away. Yeah. So we'd love to have as many of you join for that. I'll tell you one more thing. We have something called Advocacy Day, and we bring people from around the country to Washington, D.C. to meet with their senators and their congressmen and women. So for you in the state of Illinois, you will meet and we will give you some talking points on how you advocate for the government, the U.S. government to take stronger action as far as establishing its role in ending trafficking and slavery around the world. And it's a phenomenally powerful experience, I think, for you, but also has an impact. Because those officials listen when their citizens show up in Washington and say, hey, this matters to us.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here. Let's just honor our guest today. Very inspiring. And, thank you. I've been knowing about this work for a long time, and really wanted our church to be able to hear about this, and so I think that's good. Just always remember that the sanctity of life doesn't stop in the womb, but it goes all the way from the womb to the tomb. I hope that that's really clear, that we are concerned about all life all the way to the end. And there's people, Christians, that are working to end some very horrific things. We talked about abortion. We've talked about poverty in the U.S. and some of the things that we're going to be setting out to do, but then also now slavery around the world.